Do you like role-playing? Do you like playing with yourself? Well, then this is the video for you. By yourself. By yourself. Not with yourself. This isn't that kind of video. A lot of places around the US and around the world are coming out of lockdown, which is progress, kind of, I guess. But with the way people are behaving and, not wearing masks and all that stuff, I have a feeling we're going to go back into lockdown real soon. And to help you prepare for that, I've got a handful of single-player role-playing games to help you pass the time in quarantine. Our first solo RPG up is one for the aspiring author in all of us. It's a journaling RPG called The Adventurer. It's by James Chip. All you need to get started are, of course, a copy of the rules, a standard deck of playing cards, sans jokers, a journal to write in, and preferably something to write with. Maybe not quite as fancy as this. The feather is completely optional. Getting started with the adventure is pretty simple. You take your deck of cards and you split it up by suit. Each suit is set in front of you, face down. Go ahead and shuffle each one of those. Now, each suit means something different within the game. Spades, for example, are locations. Hearts are events. Diamonds are things, and clubs are people and other beings that you might run into in your game. The instructions for the game lead you through drawing various cards for locations and events, people and things and all of that, and writing journal entries about them. Every card that you draw has a particular meaning within the game. You have to draw a location card first to decide where your character starts out at, draw another location card to determine where they're going, and then start writing about why they're taking that journey. While they're on that journey, you start drawing events, things that happen along the way. And then you journal about what happened, how you overcame those events, how you tackled them. Things, what did you see? What did you run into? What did you pick up? Beings, who did you run into? What kind of animals were trying to kill you? This is an extremely open-ended game, and your imagination is the limits. It's very rules light in how you tackle these journal entries. You can come up with almost any kind of story. By the time you run out of cards, you should have a pretty decent story going. Now, if you're an aspiring author or somebody that just wants to write a story but hasn't been able to, maybe you have writer's block or maybe you just haven't had the inspiration, this might be the structured writing activity that you've been looking for. Next up, we have the Mythic GM Emulator. This was published back in 2006 as an answer to the myriad of player groups that just couldn't find anybody to run their games. It was built to handle the binary yes or no decisions that you come up with in a game. Almost everything that you do or any question that you have within the game can be boiled down to a simple yes or no. These yes or no questions within the Mythic Emulator system help you build the game world and help you drive the story. To get started with the Mythic GM Emulator system, you have to think up a scenario. This is where your game starts and who you are. For example, you might be an urban explorer who's run into a ruined mansion and you're in the foyer. Your first question here might be, is there a staircase leading upwards? It's a pretty mundane question, but it's an important one. Without a map, playing theater of the mind, it's a very valid question. Now roll on Mythic's fate table to find out whether or not yes or no. The likelihood of something being true combined with the chaos rank of your game determines how likely a yes answer will be. Lo and behold, your mansion has a staircase. In this way, you can build the world of your game through your yes or no questions. That staircase didn't necessarily exist until you rolled right there. The dice in the fate table could have said no, and then you'd have a single floor mansion, which wouldn't really be much of a mansion, would it? As things get more chaotic in the game, and there's actually rules for how chaos works, ironically, your chances of getting a yes answer go way up. This is where you have to be really careful about the kinds of yes or no questions you ask. You could ask really stupid questions that'll put a halt to your game right away. Do all the goblins in the room disappear? Awesome. You don't want to do that. Ask questions that are going to push your game forward, make it more intriguing, more fun. Do the goblins suddenly leap at me all at once? Yes, oh crap. The Mythic GM Emulator is system agnostic. That's one of the really cool things about it. You can take almost any game that you're playing and drop this right on top of it. So if you're playing D&D, you can absolutely use it. Pathfinder, yes. Fate, of course. Or, whatever. Just because you could really doesn't mean that you should. You could even pair this up with the Adventurer that I mentioned previously, or any of the other ones that I'm going to mention next. As stated in the manual, the Mythic GM Emulator is an excellent writing aid. It could add structure where you need it most. I actually wouldn't be surprised if there's a few professional authors that have used this to write their books. When I was a kid, I absolutely loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books. You've probably read a few of them yourself. I devoured these things. The very idea that you could go through a book in a non-linear fashion and affect the outcome of the story was mind-blowing. And then they freaking stopped making them. I was more than a little disappointed. But imagine my surprise when walking down the aisle at Target one day, I see this thing. I was stoked. They made it into a game! I had to have it. This thing has all the fun of reading through a storybook and making your own choices, and combines it with the fun of an RPG. There's a little bit of stat building, there's some inventory mechanics. I think it's a bit of a stretch to call it a fully fledged RPG, but it's enough to scratch the itch for those of us who want a little solo play. And don't snicker at me like that, you know what I mean. There's 2 of these games right now, and I have House of Danger, as you just saw. You take on the role of a fledgling psychic investigator who is mysteriously called to this mansion, and you have to figure out what's going on, what drew you there, and what's gonna happen. I have absolutely no idea what's gonna happen because I haven't actually finished the game yet, but I'm having a blast so far. It comes with this little board right here where you track your psychic level, which is kind of like a power level. There's a danger meter, which is obviously how dangerous things are. And there's also a little space for a goal card here and a challenge booster, which is like a buff. Now, like I said, I haven't actually finished this game yet, but if you're a fan of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, you can't go wrong here. This is great for solo play or any other number of players if you are not living alone and, like a little group play. Okay, can we knock off the laughter? You know what I mean. Last up on our list is one that's been getting a little bit of hype right now, and it's called The Wretched by Chris Bissett. Now, it's another journaling RPG with a sci-fi twist, and it uses a Jenga tower. Who doesn't love Jenga, right? Bonus points if you have the really big version of Jenga. The premise of the game is this. A hostile alien creature made its way aboard your spaceship and slaughtered all of the crew except for you. Thankfully, you were able to flush it out of an airlock, but now you're alone on a derelict ship floating in the vacuum of space. And that thing, it didn't die. It's still skittering on the outside of your ship, trying to find a way in, trying to find its way to you. Out there in the abyss, can you survive? Can you fix the life support system? Can you maintain everything else? Can you repair your beacon and call for help? If you can you survive until they get there? Like the game's manual said, probably not, but you have to try. Just like the other journaling RPGs, you'll need a standard deck of cards, shuffled and set down in front of you. You'll also need a 6-sided die, just like Into the Woods, and that Jenga tower that I mentioned earlier. Every in-game day, you roll your die, and you draw that many cards from the deck. Every card corresponds to an entry in the game's operation manual that describes what kind of obstacle your character had to overcome that day. Some of those obstacles require you to draw from your game's Jenga tower. If your tower falls at any point, your character dies because the ship blows up. The tower represents the ship's structural integrity. There are other ways to die in the game as well, like if you draw too many kings, 4 of them, or maybe it's aces, I forget. Then the creature gets inside the ship and brutally murders you, and your game is over. There's other end conditions as well. You're not likely to survive this game, but that isn't really the point. The point is the story that you come out with. At the end of each day, you write down a log about how you overcame the obstacles, what you felt, what you observed. And this could be either in a written journal, like I've shown you here before, or in an audio log, like any good science fiction movie. As opposed to the other solo RPGs that I've featured here, I think the Wretched has the least amount of replayability, just because the operations manual is pretty static. Now, every time you draw a 9 of diamonds, that's the obstacle that your character is going to overcome, and it's never going to change. There's really no interpretation of what happened. Maybe interpretation of how you overcame it and how you felt and whatnot, but the obstacle is always going to be the obstacle. However, it makes up for that limitation just by having an amazing premise and, I think, a really low barrier to entry. That staticness and prescriptiveness, I think, is going to make it a lot easier to play, especially for people who aren't used to this sort of game. Now, all of that being said, what is your favorite solo RPG? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. These things are fascinating to me. I'd love to play more of them. So hit me up. Let me know, what are your favorites? What should I play next? I'm not even going to try to lean over the table this time. Last time I leaned over the table, I pushed everything this way. I need to stop eating cookies and cake.